Now, I understand that your lab has developed a vaccine against HSV-2. Now, herpes is a really common disease. Why hasn't anybody done this before?
It's a difficult problem, and for many of the same reasons that it's difficult to get an AIDS vaccine. We think that in order to get a vaccine for herpes, you need to have a vaccine that induces both antibody responses and T-cell responses. And the existing vaccines mostly just induce an antibody response. And so it's more of a challenge to get both types of immune responses induced. Also, the classical viral vaccines are either killed virus particles or a live, attenuated, or weakened virus. And it's hard to weaken herpes or HIV so that it's safe to give them to people as a vaccine. And then a killed virus or a viral protein vaccine has been tested for herpes, and it probably didn't induce enough of a T-cell response to really give protective immunity. And it's the same for the AIDS vaccine, that the protein vaccines don't give protective immunity. So it's a difficult problem.
Right. And like I said, herpes is very common. A lot of people carry the virus. Do we know what kind of percentage there is in the American public, for example?
Yeah, in the U.S., it's about 70% of the population have antibodies specific for herpes simplex virus 1, the cause of cold sores or fever blisters. And about 20% of the U.S. population have antibodies specific for herpes simplex virus 2, which causes genital herpes. So
they have the antibodies. They've been exposed to it.
That's right. They've been exposed to it. They've had at least a mild infection. They may not know that they have or known that they had cold sores or genital herpes, but they've been exposed to the virus and potentially have the virus latent in their nerve cells.
All right. Now, would a vaccine for HSV-2, the one that causes genital herpes, would it help someone who's already infected, and who's the target of the vaccine?
So we plan to test the vaccine against both people that are uninfected and people that are already infected. In animal models, the vaccine has worked to prevent new infections in mice and guinea pigs, and it has worked in guinea pigs to reduce recurrent infections if the vaccine is given after the animals are already infected. So we plan to test it against both against people that are not infected yet and in people that are already infected.
Mm-hmm. That would be nice. And is there any progress to report in the vaccine trials?
We've done the experiments in the animal systems, and so the vaccine has been licensed by a company, was called Acambus, and now it's part of Sanofi Pasteur, and they are working on producing the virus as a clinical product for clinical trials. So that's now out of my laboratory and into a company, being worked on in a company. So my understanding is that they're making progress in producing it, and so hopefully the trials will be soon.
Oh, good. It's moving forward then.
Yes.
Now, from what I understand, the vaccine strain you used is replication defective mutant, and you need a lot of viruses to make a vaccine. How do you grow a big batch of viruses that don't replicate?
Right. So it's replication defective in normal cells. So the virus is engineered to be defective for two essential viral genes, but it's grown in cells a special cell line that have the two missing viral genes introduced into them. So it will grow in this special cell line that we call a complementing cell line because it complements the defect of the mutant virus. So we grow it in this special cell line, but when it goes into normal cells in the body or in culture or in animals, it will only go partway through the replication cycle. So it's very safe.
Okay. So it needs these special cells to multiply, to replicate. But then once the vaccine is or would be injected into the human body, it can no longer replicate.
That's right.
Now, HSV2 is sexually transmitted, but so is HPV, the human papillomavirus, for which we have a vaccine. But the HPV vaccine has been controversial because proponents say it's safe and it'll save lives, but opponents say being vaccinated against HPV, which causes some kinds of cervical cancer, will give women and girls this mistaken impression that they're protected from all sorts of sexually transmitted disease. Once the herpes vaccine is approved for use, let's keep our fingers crossed. Do you see the kind of public fight? Do you expect to see the kind of public fight we've seen over the HPV vaccine?
Well, there may be some of that response. Hopefully, the HPV vaccine has paved the way for future acceptance of sexually transmitted disease vaccines. I think there may be some differences between an HSV vaccine and HPV vaccine in terms of the social issues, in that there's definitely a clamor, or at least many requests for a genital herpes vaccine from people that are already suffering from genital herpes, and people want it for their kids. Now, how general that is not clear. It's maybe anecdotal in terms of the emails and phone calls that I get. But genital herpes is sort of an immediate disease as opposed to, and there are symptoms that people want to alleviate, and people don't want their kids, and they want the symptoms alleviated for themselves as well, as opposed to an HPV vaccine and cervical carcinoma, which is much more long term. So there seems to be in the studies that some of the social scientists have done and some of the marketing people for companies, it appears that there is more of an immediate concern about genital herpes, and hopefully that will play out in terms of a more immediate acceptance of a vaccine.
I see. With an effective herpes vaccine, the hope is, or the expectation is, that treatment with the vaccine could alleviate people who are already suffering from herpes, whereas an effective HPV papillomavirus vaccine won't make your cancer go away, or it won't keep you from contracting a carcinoma again. Is that right?
Yes, that's the current HPV vaccine is targeted against, is really approved for preventing infection. And there's no sense that there's any therapeutic value to that as yet. But there's continued research and working on HPV vaccines and new types of vaccines.